The anchoring bias in decision making is one of those biases that sometimes we almost don't want to believe actually exists, but I can tell you it really does. Anchoring is when we latch on to the first piece of information we hear. We grab on to that first number or that first opinion or that first idea that somebody shouts at us, right? And sometimes leaders unintentionally, or maybe intentionally, will anchor a group's thinking by being the first person to call out a piece of information. For example, let's say that I am the leader of a team of professors and I'm thinking about hiring another professor, but I kind of make believe that I want their opinions. And I say, look, I'm interested in your ideas about whether the department should hire a new professor. Let me know what you think. I, as the leader, I definitely think we should hire a professor. What does everybody else think? Well, by being the first person to call out my opinion, in this case, if I'm the leader, I've anchored everybody to my opinion. It doesn't mean they're going to say the same thing. It doesn't mean they agree with me, but I've put that anchor out there and I've kind of pushed their minds or steered them to the place where I want the decision to go. Also, if I said to you, how much are you willing to pay for this? How much are you willing to pay to tickets to the basketball game? About $150 or so? Well, by calling out the $150, I've just anchored you. I don't know what you would have been willing to pay for them. Maybe you thought they would only go for $50. But by hearing me say the number 150, you might say, oh, wow, I guess these things really are worth 150. I had no idea. I guess I better pay up if I want to go to this game. So calling out that first number or that first opinion will sometimes anchor people. And if you're the victim of that anchoring, in other words, if somebody is calling out a number to you or an opinion to you for the first time, you want to be careful not to get anchored to what they're saying. Now, price negotiations, if you're ever negotiating on the price of something, this is a classic situation where your willingness to pay can be influenced by somebody who calls out the first number. Think about a real estate agent who's selling a house or maybe trying to rent you an apartment. They might say something like this: rents in this neighborhood are on the high side, but this is an excellent neighborhood. Rents tend to be between $1,800 and $2,000. Okay, well, knowing nothing else about this neighborhood, you have now been anchored. Now you're going to judge every apartment that you see in this neighborhood versus that anchor that the real estate agent just told you, right? So if you're anchored to $1,800 to $2,000, that means if you find an apartment for $1,700, you're going to think that's a good deal, even though it may not be. So by being anchored to the range, 1,800 to 2,000, you might make some interesting decisions and you might be skewed or you might make warped decisions because you're focusing too much on that anchor that the real estate agent put out there. How do you know if that's the right range? Maybe the average price of apartments in the neighborhood is only 1,400, right? Are you doing any research or are you just hearing that anchor and going with it? So that's what an anchor is. And we call it the anchoring trap when all of the future estimates and all of the decisions tend to be clustered around that same anchor, right? So let's go with this real estate agent example. If the real estate agent says, rents are between $1,800 and $2,000 in this neighborhood, so what are you willing to pay? Well, you're probably going to come pretty close to the 1,800 to 2,000. You're probably going to say, oh, yeah, I don't know, 17, 1,800, sure. You've been anchored. Okay. Could be very, very dangerous if you are trying to make an important decision and if you're being anchored and not doing your own research or your own decision making, right? A really scary experiment happened a while back and I think this was done at a university where students were asked to write down on a piece of paper privately the last two digits of their social security number. Okay. So maybe one student wrote down 26, another student wrote down 34, Another student wrote down 4-5. Another student wrote down 5-0. Another student wrote down 5-6, 7-9, 8-5, 9-8. And then the professor talked about something else. And then later during that class session, they were shown a bottle of wine. And the students were asked, well, hypothetically, how much would you be willing to pay for this bottle of wine? And interestingly and scary, in a very scary way, the people who had lower social security numbers, in other words, where the last two digits were lower, were willing to pay a lot less for the wine. And the people who had just written down the last two digits of their higher social security numbers were actually willing to pay more for the wine. What does this show you? It shows you that sometimes we could be anchored by things that actually have nothing to do with the question at hand, right? How much is the bottle of wine worth? Well, I don't know. The students didn't know either. But the fact that they had recently written down the last two digits of their social security numbers actually impact how much they were willing to pay for that bottle of wine. So anchoring could be really surprising in certain situations. So always be on guard when you hear a number first or somebody tries to push you into a range like the real estate agent did, 1,800 to 2,000. So I say be careful, but how can you be careful with the anchoring trap? Well, there are a couple of things that we can do to protect from the anchoring bias. One is do a little bit of research individually before we approach the problem. So for example, if we're going on an appointment with a real estate agent who's going to help us find an apartment, maybe we should be doing our own research first a little bit so we get an idea of what the rents are in that neighborhood. So that if the real estate agent says, well, 1,800 to 2,000 is what the apartments go for, you might say, well, thank you, but I actually found a few that are 1,500, so let's look at those. So being equipped with your own research will help you avoid latching on to that first number that you hear. These might seem like simple solutions to the problem, but just by doing research and just by thinking about the issue yourself before you ask someone else to give their opinion, that those are powerful tools to help you avoid this bias. Applying this to my first example as well, where a group of professors got together and the leader asked for their opinion. And remember, the leader said, I want to know whether you think we should hire a new professor. I think we should. Well, if the other professors come to the meeting already having thought through the issue individually, then they'll bring an opinion to the table, regardless of whether their boss tries to anchor them. So practice these and ask yourself in your daily lives, are there cases where you're anchored and may not even realize it?